Roz, good evening, and it's morning here. And I am so grateful that you would stay up late at night. This seems like the vibe of you and I. I'm getting up early, you're staying up late. We're working hard to
Yes.
bring the new church into the world. And you, in particular, have for a very long time been doing such important work to lift up the voices of women, to create more balance in our world and in our church. And as we get ready for this event on gender equity with the Helen Keller Collaborative, with Deborah's Tree as a co-sponsor, I just really wanted to make some space to hear a bit more of your story of what called you to this work and how it's been going.
I think it had a lot to do with having been brought up in the sort of conservative end of the Swedenborgian community where women are not ordained. And I felt called to ministry as a girl and sort of dismissed it as, well, I'm a girl, so I can't do that. But later on in my 30s, I kind of looked at that again and decided, I can do that. I can be a chaplain. So I did all the training to be a chaplain. And not long after that, there was sort of a movement underfoot in this sort of, like I said, in the conservative end of the Swedenborgian community to kind of look again at the interpretation of all the different teachings that we'd received, including about women's ordination and women's roles in general and gender differences. And so that really, I was definitely involved in that effort. And I guess it really is, it's sort of like the wounded healer kind of thing. Like I had experienced being dismissed as a woman in my faith community and really struggled with that, and did eventually find my voice and find my path and joined many other women who'd been on that path, to really step into who we are and the gifts that we have in ministry, which, look at you. Look at all the
There are many and varied.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that's really, really what it was that led me, to a path to really look at all of these things and want to lift up the voices of various kinds of Swedenborgian women who've not historically really had their voices paid attention to. Culturally, for millennia, but also specifically in the, Swedenborgian New Church faith communities.
Well, and that's just it. It's everywhere. And the only way for it to change everywhere is for it to change in all the little places.
Oh,
So it's like you're really shepherding the change in our Swedenborgian world, which is so important because our Swedenborgian world is pointing to that larger world transformation. And certainly my sense that the new church that Swedenborg is pointing to, that this new world transformation that he's pointing to, is going to require all of us. And it's going to require the voices of everyone. And I love that it's your story, your particular story of your following your faithful life with God and then finding barriers to that, that led you to this work. And then not just breaking through the barrier, but then wanting to help others too. I mean, it does feel like that's how change has happened on the planet. What do you think women's voices bring? Anything you might want to say to that?
Well, that question reminds me of a conversation I had with one of the ministers in the General Convention, who was on the Council of Ministers when the whole debate was happening about ordaining women, which was back in the 1970s. This guy was young at the time and had been on the Council of Ministers for a couple of years, and then saw the transformation in the Council of Ministers of having women present. Before, there'd be doctrinal arguments and just that sort of battle over interpretations or power in the denomination. And he saw a transformation. I really want an interview with him to really capture that, anyway, that he felt that the discussions became gentler, more polite. There wasn't a power struggle. It was much more of a sort of a partnership of how are we as a council of ministers going to function together, uh, you know, in a pastoral way to the community at large. So I think that the value of partnership, which is more sort of intrinsic in a feminine way of being,
Yeah.
is huge, huge change rather than more of a hierarchical sort of structure. I think that's one thing. And then a lot of the biblical imagery is very masculine and about fighting, things that I don't really relate to. Of course, I do, because we all do have struggle in our lives spiritually and in many other ways. But I much prefer the imagery of healing and nurturing and feeding and dandling a baby on your lap.
Mhm.
Yeah, I haven't forgotten you, I'm nursing you, that sort of thing. Being able to really focus on those scriptures, like even with my ministry, Deborah's Tree, which is based on the name is comes from a biblical story of a female prophet called Deborah who sat under the tree. It is amazing how many people haven't heard that story. People who've grown up Christian, people who've grown up in the new church in the Swedenborgian circles. That story hasn't been actively repressed. It just, pushed down or ignored. It's just hasn't been lifted up because she's a woman. And that's what my belief is, that it's because she's a woman, and it sort of goes against some of the long held beliefs that the divine always speaks to males, that, well, there was this instance. Anyway,
Many instances, the first
yeah.
women at the tomb, there's so many women in the scriptures and right, if only men are reading them and only men are interpreting them, then it's always going to kind of filter through that lens. It's interesting what you bring up about the the tenor of the community that shifted after women's ordination. Because that's what's one of the things I sense is that I've heard the stories as well of the battles. And even when I was first ordained, I remember kind of having this very heated conversation in the comm meetings and um there was this real openness to differences of opinion, which then often creates fights, right? That's what men do, right? If we have differences of opinion, we fight. Um, and I think what's interesting about that in my perspective now is I'm really interested. Okay, well, can we all get along, and can we really talk to each other? Can we really hear from each other? And that's a big part of what my ministry is about. Is now we have everybody at the table, how to balance the masculine and the feminine, how to voice our particular opinions, but then, yeah, have that kind of ethic of care and, that matriarchal, we can all be here, we can all coexist, and that's primary. Um, I do feel like that's so important for our church, important for the planet, probably right now in many ways.
I think what you said about balance is also
Yeah.
very important because I don't want to be lifting up female voices and the values that women hold as to the exclusion of everything else. Like each one of us needs to find that balance of what you could call feminine or what you could call masculine. And then we need to find that balance, in our communities and in the ways that we function. And yeah, not, because we've seen the effect of having too much of one, in the world that's been dominated by what men consider important, men's values. We have conditions of war like we're in right now. And there's all kinds of things, violence that, not to say that women, like I said, are never fight or are never violent, but that's not something that we would tend to value. And so if we can get more of a balance rather than have one point of view or one set of values dominate over the other. Mm.
It's what can really bring peace because we will all continue to exist on this planet. We're not going to wipe out all the men and only have women. We have to be here together. And well, and it would be from what you've described of what the values of the feminine are for women to just, okay, now we're gonna kick you out and now we're gonna be in charge. Like that's not what it's about. I love all the writing that's being done right now about what matriarchy really is. It's not okay, now we're gonna have women in charge. It's no, now we're gonna actually create this circle of care where the vulnerable are in the center and where we really do all all care about the what we each are bringing. So we're collaborative. You've used that word before, collaborative, cooperative, instead of it's just, I mean, it's a little silly sometimes when I think of the model that we do live in of like, well, no, I'm the best and I'm not going to share what I know because I need to hold on to it, and it's just so limiting to our capacity as a species. Yeah. So tell me a little, you started a ministry, I'm starting a ministry. You're creating a path. It's a new path. It's a new path that you're carving out in a world that is structured, not necessarily for your highest thriving. How's this been? Has it been smooth? Has it been bumpy? I mean, you're an incredibly resilient human being, but what might you share with us about the journey of developing Deborah's Tree and bringing this into the world?
First of all, I'm just so grateful for all the support that I've had. And because I live in Byrn Athyn, Pennsylvania, where there's a lot of Swedenborgians, there have been a lot of people to step up. So it was pretty easy to create a community right away of men and women supporting, what I was trying to do with Deborah's Tree. I think the biggest challenge, because it's primarily an online ministry, is the tech. I knew some things about technology, but not everything by any means. And so I feel like for anyone that's trying to bring sort of the holy city into the world in an online kind of way, there's so many technological hurdles. There's so many things you have to learn, and you can do it very simply. So that's my biggest challenge, is learning those things. And I'm just so impressed with you with all the different ways that you podcasts and different recording studios.
I struggle with it as well, though. It is, I mean, I'm sort of a jump in and just see if it works kind of a person. So and there, I mean, the technology, I'm sure even just in the last 5 or 10 years has probably transformed in terms of what's available to us. Like it really is pretty incredible how on some level it's easy, but then there is a lot of back end, it's using a masculine part of our brains. I think about this a lot. There is a lot of masculine energy that has to go into kind of navigating all of this access. But then it does give you this platform to communicate. Well, and I love hearing that you had a real community on the ground, which is another thing I sense. I think sometimes when things are ready to come into being, there's a person that it gets put on their heart to do it, but the reason it gets put on their heart to do it is there are actually a lot of other people who see it as needed and necessary. And it feels like you stepped into this work at a moment that was ripe, and not alone. Like you said, there were women already studying the script, studying the teachings. Gathering Leaves was also already functioning at that point
Definitely.
when Deborah's Tree was born.
Yep. Gathering Leaves started, which is the international retreat for Swedenborgian women. And it started in 2004. And really, Deborah's Tree came into existence during the pandemic. So our launch was in 2022. So Gathering Leaves had been around for a long time. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was very formative for me. Um, Very formative for me to to be with other female clergy, because I was already a chaplain at that point, but still wasn't sure about ordination, fully functioning as a minister in all the ways that I do now. So seeing how women could do that so with so much grace and so much wisdom, and to then be in a community of women around the world, around the country, that yeah, that was huge. Yeah.
Were there anybody in particular you want to lift up? I mean, I guess that's not a very feminine thing to name individuals, but were there any particular women along this path that that guided you or that inspired you to step into this?
Oh, well, your mother, Reverend Susanna Curry, she was the minister at Temenos, which is a Swedenborgian community on the other side of Philadelphia from Byrn Athyn, where I live. And so back in the early 2000s, she was very helpful to the women in the general church and men too that were interested in this transformative kind of deconstructing, reconstructing. She was very supportive, and she was the first Swedenborgian female minister that I experienced going to Temenos and then and through Gathering Leaves. And but at Gathering Leaves, the first or second time I was there, I forget, but Reverend Sarah Buteau, who I think herself was rather recently ordained at that point, when I was talking to her about, my path and what I was thinking about, she said to me, "Ros, you are a minister." And that so stuck with me. That really stuck with me. Um, you know, okay, she saw that and she encouraged me and, you know, went
Yeah.
forward.
And here you are. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so power I mean, Gathering Leaves is and just the model of just getting together and being together. I mean, it's so uh in some ways church is kind of a simple thing. I think that's what it is. And when to be able to be in that space with women who all are affirming the divinity and the sacredness of female leadership and spiritual knowing, I think is so useful, and I'm sure it played a huge role in probably your getting the gumption and the vision. I mean, so where did the vision come from for Deborah Street? Did it land in your heart in a moment of prayer? Can you tell us a little bit about the
Well, it goes back actually to, oh my goodness, probably around 2010-ish. There was actually an outreach seminar that was put on ministers and other people, mainly ministers from convention and from the general church, got together for a weekend of learning about outreach and using all these modern technologies to do that. And one of the speakers was Tony Jones, who was a leader in the, I think it was called the Emerging Church.
church?
Anyway, he spoke about how for him, he had a ministry called Solomon's Porch where he did have a church, but he was saying, don't, if you're going to start up a new ministry, don't use one of those old school kind of names like, Holy, the Church of the, he was using the shepherd ones, the Good Shepherd or any of those Saint anybody's church, because that's very off putting to people now who are trying to develop a new way of looking at Christianity. So he said that's why he called his ministry Solomon's Porch. And they had an online component and they had a physical component. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And at some future point, at this point, I was in training, but I was not ordained yet. I thought at some point, maybe in my future, I might do something like that. But I would use a feminine sort of imagery like Deborah's tree. Now, that was sort of in the back of my mind, like someday that could be a possibility. And finally, in the pandemic, when I was laid off for 4 months, I had time to really do it. But by then, through various experiences, I'd sort of focused it on, I didn't want it to be just a kind of a church organization with an online element like he did, but I wanted it to be a way to lift up the voices of Swedenborgian women within our community and beyond. And that's actually something that has changed or transformed since 2020, which is, so that's in the last 7 years, is that through our online work with YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, we were on X, but no longer. I really saw the value of our ministry that's like women who are doing the videos. We also have a blog, two blogs, but one that's actually working. uh, but to reach out beyond our community and be a way to bring Swedenborg's name and the sort of the values and the teachings in the Swedenborgian community outside of who our the confines of our community, but to people who are seeking and searching. Um, and so it's sort of more dual purpose now, not just to lift up Swedenborgian women's voices within our community, but to bring our wisdom and our love and our approach beyond many people who are in that endeavor to bring Swedenborg out into the world, and most of those are men. And so I feel like it's a very valuable.
Yes, yes. I think so too, and I'm so appreciative of you of all that you have brought, and it feels so useful and pivotal to what I'm seeking to bring because I really wanna create I think more spaces with men and with women, have to have and non human who are non-binary, like all the people who have different perspectives on life, on the call of the new church. We have so much to bring to each other. It's interesting that this emerged during the pandemic when you had time. I mean, it does feel like that's another just reality of bringing new things into the world is we're all so
Yes.
busy with our routines and our lives. And on some level, the pandemic was very rich for me too. It was a time to restart and reimagine. And once the pandemic ended, did you still have time to do all of this?
Um, yeah, I was only laid off for 4 months, so then I was, like, right back into working, but I've been able to create the time or, find the time is maybe a better way, reprioritize things, still there's many other things that are important to me, but this is a passion. This is something I really, as I said, I was called as a child, which was obviously a long time ago,
Yes.
but to be able to be doing it,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a
And what
blessing.
is your favorite part of doing it right now? What is it that gives you the most joy in all the things? I mean, you're touring Australia, serving other churches right now. You lead Bever's Tree. You're involved in gathering leaves. There's probably things I'm not naming. Is there any part of that that is like the most joyful for you?
I think it's when in groups of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned traveling around Australia, which I just did now, so to different congregations um, that are not supported by a minister, and just to be with the people and you know, s- some. It's not necessarily about teaching and preaching at all. It's more about connecting, supporting, discovering together, those kind of things. And the same with the Deborah's Tree community. I do. I write a newsletter, produce videos, edit, promote other people. Um, that I love it when we're together and just and feel it.
You can feel it in your heart.
Yeah.
And then that's another piece of your work that I feel like is informing mine and probably Swedenborg informed it too. And Jesus, lots of other people, but just that the church is this transmission of love and truth. And it's contained in the books that we read and it can be held in the liturgies that we perform. And yet it does feel like where it's really flowing is like in the body of humans that are gathered. It's and however that gathering takes place. And that's probably, I don't know, maybe the reason I focus on that is because I'm a woman. It's certainly your focus, comes from your sense of being fem- female and the masculine does sort of maybe tend to focus on the words a little more or the forms, whereas the feminine is a little more tied to the flow of love happening in between. And because you wouldn't have a church service if there weren't people gathered, right? That
Yes.
it's the people receiving.
I wouldn't be lifting up the voices of female Swedenborgians if there weren't women gathered to do that, to be together to do that. Yeah. And I think that I feel like, anyway, that sort of the emphasis on like the minister's role is to lead to the goodness in life through truth. I feel like in my experience in the past, there was so much emphasis on that truth bit. We really have to get the truth right. And that it's my job as a minister to spread the truth. And I definitely am teaching truth, using truth, but the motivator, the love, like you said, the connectedness of the people is
Well,
where that
that's
truth manifests, you know?
well, exactly. You can focus on the truth all you want, but if there isn't love in it, then it's actually not truth. So you probably should it's probably worthwhile to sense into the is there a feeling of connection? And I certainly feel this way. Like if somebody tells me a truth, it can be the most beautiful truth on the planet, but if I'm not really connected or paying attention, it's just going to go right through me. It's not going to land. But when someone speaks from the heart, something that is true, it has just such a different resonance and receptivity. Do you have in your travels as a Swedenborgian minister, as a um, someone who was called since a very young age, who was exposed to a form of church through the general church? Do you have any sense of how the church is changing with women's voices? I mean, this is my question a lot of the time: is the church as we have it, it was created by men, right? It was men sitting at a table and saying, let's start a denomination, let's do it this way, let's create this book. And I'm so grateful that they did all of that because we wouldn't be sitting here today had they not done that. Um, and now it's been some time that we've had more women's leadership. And I sometimes have this sense of, okay, well, I've stepped in to a, a role that was developed by men. I'm glad to be in this role. I'm glad to have that. But now what's my role in shifting or changing or transforming? Do you have any sense of that? Or are we just doing it by being present?
Mm. I do know, from, that the first rabbis, female rabbis that were ordained, at first, these are the stories I've heard, just tried to fit right into the masculine mold and were very unhappy until they sort of gathered together and said, "What is it that we really want to bring?" And it was all those things like partnership, um, ways of gathering with people to understand what's the motivation is, not so much what the actual teaching is, that sort of thing. And so it's a little hard to didn't necessarily translate that over to my experience in the Swedenborgian communities because there have already been women there making the changes. I'm not one of the first ones.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting perspective that they had to get together to talk about it. And I think
Yeah.
that's like even asking you that question would be like, well, like it'd be a kind of a masculine thing to say, well, I think the church should change like this, and that's what women should. Like the reality is, each one of us brings something different. Um, and maybe that has been happening. I mean, certainly in convention, I think it's possible there are more women on the council now than men. A lot of change has occurred. I do think though we could do with some more conversation about what that is, because perhaps it certainly might, in my understanding, there wasn't a group of female rabbis going, let's talk about how we want this to be different. I think everyone's sort of been doing it differently in their own way, which probably comes from the ethic of convention, which is very much about freedom and diversity, and people are very different and following different kinds of paths. And I think my one of my hopes for these coming months and years until I leave this planet is that we'll have more of these kinds of conversations about how this trickles down into the lived experience of a worshiping community. Maybe you could speak a bit about the home church, which is another thing that you do. How does your role as a female minister infuse how you hold that community?
Yes. So the home church started sort of out of this deconstructing, reconstructing movement back in the early 2000s. And so a group of us, men and women, got together and said, not necessarily being fed by the traditional ways that church is being done. Let's create our own way of doing things. So a sort of feminine value kind of way, sat in a circle, what's important to us, what's not important, what do we want to keep, what do we want to change. So we decided we definitely wanted to have the open word, but we didn't want to make a big deal about opening and closing it, just have it open. We wanted everybody to have a voice, everybody to have a chance to explain or talk about what's important to them, not necessarily have somebody up there on the chancel picking the reading and telling you what it means, but like we're all going to explore spirituality together. and we wanted some time of silent meditation, not so much music. I'm not saying we didn't want music, but for the silent sort of meditative practice at the beginning to get into the space to really be open to the divine. So we designed our own service together, and we've been doing it pretty much the same since since 2003. Everybody's invited to bring something that's helped them on their spiritual path, and we just go in a circle sharing that meditation, and then we end with prayer. Very simple. We also periodically do a Lectio Divina service,
Mhm.
which is an ancient practice of slowly reading a passage from the Word repeatedly and just sort of going deeper and deeper into the personal meaning of it. And then for the like Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, we sort of have a festival service where there's actually a theme, because the rest of the time it's not a theme; it's whatever you feel moved to bring. But so everybody will bring some music and a reading to do with whatever the holiday is, and we celebrate that way. So there was one time when I was in Auckland, or going to be stopping in Auckland, New Zealand, on my way to Australia. This is going back a long time, um, probably, and I don't know when it was, in the late 2018 ish. And they asked me to lead a service, and I said, "Well, this is kind of last minute or something. Let's just do a home church kind of thing. So everybody bring something um, to share." And the group decided that it would be on the theme of water. I'm like, that's fine. So we sat in the sanctuary in a circle instead of in the pews, and we did it. They loved it, and now they call it a smorgasbord Sunday. Smorgasbord. And it's a regular part of how the Auckland church
Mhm.
operates. And
Wow.
definitely with a lot of the congregations that have become smaller, they've sort of incorporated the worship circle kind of concept, especially, when there's lay leadership. It's a very organic and it's just a ultimately very feminine way of coming together and sharing our experience.
I don't know that I've ever heard exactly what you did do at the home church, and it is kind of blowing my mind how resonant it is with what I seek to do with my Be Love, Be Honest Peaceful gatherings. It's very similar. It's
It
very
is.
much the motivation is to honor the holiness of each person. And it's almost like it's like spiritual show and tell. It's like
Yes.
let's just come
Yeah.
together and share how the Lord is showing up for us and how what we're receiving. And yeah, I love the smorgasbord image, all of
Yes.
those. Like
Yeah.
it's like sharing a meal. Maybe there is something in that.
We just sort of started calling ourselves our home church without putting any deep effort into it, but I can see how that could be misleading, because you might think we're doing a formal liturgy in somebody's
Mhm,
living
mhm.
room, which is absolutely informal and participatory, not not
But it's a
ritual.
form that you've been
Yeah.
doing since 2003.
Yeah.
So it
And
is simple, but it's actually is a form, and there's a structure to it, um, which is actually quite lovely, and, I don't know, it'd be interesting to see how I think this is one of my hopes is we could be in conversation with each other about how we do these things, and maybe there is some consistency that actually can be created, that's not, hard or limiting,
yes.
but that does help people. I think that's one of the things about we do like to have some sense of what to expect when we step into a community, right? And it sounds like you've created a form that is comfortable and familiar, but also
Yes.
fluid,
Yes.
which is
Yeah.
lovely. Interesting. So, okay, it's late at night and you need to go to sleep. So we're gonna end this. We're gonna plug this gender equity and the New Jerusalem event that Deborah's Tree and the collaborative are sponsoring. March 24th, Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern. It'll be live streamed. You're welcome to come and listen to the conversation with myself and Dr. Paige Morahan. pop in your questions. I think we even have, this will be a technology question. I think we have the technology to bring people on live who have questions. So if you can come to that live, please do. And we will release it as a podcast the following week. So you can always listen in if you can't be there live. And before we say goodbye, Roz, what's your what's your hope? What's your leading edge right now? Anything you want to say about what's coming, or your hopes for how your work is going to continue bringing change into the world in terms of lifting up the voices of women?
I think for now we're perceived as being a women's ministry for women, and there is value in that to strengthen our confidence in being women. But I really would like this message to get out to male, female, everybody, that our voices are lifted up, that it becomes like not even necessary to have a special ministry to lift up women's voices, but that, you know, people hear, and we do. I mean, we have events that are male and female, but more female participation. And that's the perception that it's a for women. But I think that would be my leading edge, is to really get what we have discovered amongst ourselves to become
Yes.
well known and accepted in the whole community.
Bring transformation to the whole community and to the masculine forces in the community that will be made better for it in their own seeking of balance and wisdom. Here, here. I'm with you. We will continue the effort, and may balance be restored one day. Thank you
Yes.
so much for all you have done. You really are an inspiration to me and to many others. You work so hard. I pray you get a good night's sleep.
Oh, there's no doubt. But thank you, Sage. Thank you for this event that you're putting on. Uh, Dr. Paige Moran is a wonderful human being, and she has a lot of wisdom in this area.
I think so, and it feels fitting to start with gender equity personally,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
see this beyond a series as like, we know the New Jerusalem is heaven on earth. We know there's balance and beauty. Let's now sort of look at all of the different lenses that are getting in the way, and it does seem like this imbalance between men and women on this planet, the imbalance between power and care is it's becoming pretty obvious, I think, to many of us that that is harmful to each other, and so it feels important to start there, and we will persist. Well, thank you so much, friend.
Uh,
It's
You are so
the
welcome.
emperor to be entered.